Hello, everybody. This is lecture number 5. I am Professor Robert Alexander. Obviously, I'm going to be the one conducting this lecture. So we are going to go ahead and get started. All right, lecture 5, if I could bring it up. Okay, here we go. And this will come from the book Comprehensive Stress Management. As I am talking, you are taking notes. The more you write, the more you retain. Chapter outline for lecture number 5 is coping with the stressor. We're going to look at the model of stress. We're also going to talk about setting up roadblocks, comprehensive stress management approach. I'm going to take a deep dive and look at the eustress and the model, taking control and how to make a commitment to dealing with all the stressors in your life, right? And you have to know that everybody has stressors, me included, right? So even though I teach stress management, if I don't apply certain techniques and strategies, then I'm not walking the walk. Okay, I'm just talking the talk. So the activities to prevent a stressor from resulting in a negative consequences such as psychological discomfort, anxiety, illness, and disease, right? So we're going to look at some interventions that are going to help with all of these. So coping with the stressor, what does that mean? A stress can result of a demand that exceeds resources available to meet that demand. Okay? Coping is engaging in a behavior or a thought to respond to that demand. Okay, so this could be task-oriented coping, which could include finding a better way to do that task. It could be emotion-focused coping, managing one's feelings and or accepting that task is beyond one talent, right? So you may say that I don't have the techniques to deal with that, right? And then in that situation, you would try to find somebody that does have the talent to deal with that, right? But this is all tied into managing your own feelings and emotion and knowing that you may not be capable of dealing with that in that way, and then having that support system that can, right? So categories of appraisal. So we got primary appraisal, which is judging how much of a threat is involved and how important is the outcome, right? So that's also kind of how we interpret, right? Interpretation of the stressor. So secondary appraisal is determining whether resources needed to meet the demand are available. So I always talk about the counseling center. In this course, I talk about our mental health and wellness team. We also have a food pantry that for those students that are struggling with food insecurity, meaning you don't have the necessarily means to have a meal every day, right? This college wants to be able to help you with that. So we also have reappraisal, evaluating whether the response made to a demand or threat was effective, right? So, this evaluation, you're constantly kind of navigating and using your mind and heart to make these decisions. And, you're constantly judging what this stressor involves, okay? Or the appraisal. So when we look at Lazarus's model of appraisal, okay, we have two different ways that a particular person is dealing with appraisal, right? If you look at the top half, so the stressor, to start there, is speaking in front of the class. We're going to look at two different ways of handling under primary appraisal, secondary appraisal, and reappraisal. So, one train of thought is not a big deal. I've spoken before other groups and done well in regards to speaking in front of the class. Okay. The other person might say, I might make a fool of myself. Secondary appraisal, one person might say, no threat, so no stress. That's where the appraisal ends. The other person might say, I'm not very articulate, nor do I have a good vocabulary. Okay. So there are two different ways of approaching this. All right. Another person might say, no stress, the speech was terrible, but so what? What the class thinks of me doesn't matter at all. Okay. The stress situation says, I did make a fool of myself. Next time I'll have to use posters or a PowerPoint presentation to make the speech more interesting. Two different approaches under the Lazarus model of appraisal. Now, this is a word that we use all the time in education, which is self-efficacy. Self-efficacy refers to the confidence in the ability to manage a demand or threat. So I consider myself a person that has a high level of self-efficacy. It's how I feel about certain situations, and in turn, how I feel about me and my ability to carry out something, right? Whether it's a task, teaching, when I was a student studying on my own. So the outcome efficacy means availability of an effective strategy to manage a demand or a threat. Personal efficacy is successfully employing a strategy. So you carried it out. So you said that I am going to study Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. leading up to this midterm. And I have a month in order to study for this midterm. And I'm not going to break that. And that midterm comes and you do very well. You have practiced personal efficacy and you also demonstrated outcome efficacy, if that makes sense. Okay, pause the video and let's look at the stress model, right? Life situation, perceived as stressful, emotional arousal, physiological arousal, and the consequences. And you will go through each step in order to break down and make sense of what your body is going through physiologically and psychologically, leading all the way from the life situation to the consequences. A model of stress, cognitive appraisal, interpretation of the stress, emotional arousal, fear, anger, insecurity, physiological arousal, increase in serum, cholesterol, respiratory and heart rates, muscle tension, blood pressure, blood glucose levels are raised. Consequences are poor performance, poor interpersonal relationship, and illness. Can have many feedback loops. Consequences of stress can become a new stressor and start a new feedback loop. I want you to pause the video and take some time and look at figure 5.4, the stress model of a map, where step 1, a new or potentially unpleasant situation, leading all the way to step 5, the consequences. This is a visual of the stress model. Setting up roadblocks. So the intervention involves setting up roadblocks at various points on the stress theory model. So models include sequential phases, with each phase dependent upon that previous phase, right? So they draw off one another, right? So how you do in one stage could potentially affect how you do in the next phase of the stress model. Okay, and then we talk about cognitive restructuring, or medications can be used as roadblocks in the initial stage, right? And sometimes over medicating, that doesn't necessarily have to come from a pharmacy. It can just be too much drugs or alcohol. And this is why it's important to introduce into our lives healthy relaxation techniques, because those can keep emotional reactions from leading to prolonged physiological arousal. Now, when we talk about physical activity and how those can effectively block the continuation of stress after physiological arousal has occurred, it's important to note that, right? Now, when we look at comprehensive stress management, I like to introduce several interventions at all phases of the stress theory model. And this is something that we've talked about in class, but several means of intervening are used at each phase. The complete elimination of stress is not recommended, right? You want to take subtle steps to address that stress. The ultimate goal is to rid yourself of that stress, right? So attempts to perform within the optimal levels of stress. Transferable skills of effectively managing stress. So most effective methods are prevention of that stress, planning to avoid stress. So everybody has somebody in your life that stresses you out. Try your best to avoid that situation. Or another stressor, because I have teenagers that one of them recently got a speeding ticket. One thing you can do, speeding tickets are very expensive. One thing you can do to avoid that stressor is not speed. Or if you get pulled over for not wearing your seatbelt, put your seatbelt on. These are really, I know it sounds simplistic, but if we could do our due diligence to avoid that stressor in the first place, then this is a great way to alleviate pain that comes from stress. So source management, this has to do with reducing or eliminating the source of the stress. Last effective methods are relaxation, meditation, diaphragmatic breathing, right? This is when we are breathing through our diaphragm. So you might have a yoga instructor or somebody that you're taking a meditation class will say, hold in that breath for 3 seconds, breathe out for 5. This is diaphragm breathing. Thought management. Reinterpreting stressful thoughts to be less stressful. Eustress. Stress that results in positive consequences. This is a good stress, right? So pumping yourself up to do well on that interview, right? Bringing up that cortisol level and the heart rate in order to perform well on that test, in order to give a speech in our communication class. This is a eustress. It encourages optimum performance. Stress models can be used to explain negative and positive consequences of stress. Being stressed for the better. Positive life event that required significant adjustment. A threatening event that led to make important changes in life. Okay, these are examples of eustress. Take some time, pause the video, look at figure 5.5 until you understand it. This is the Yerkes-Dodson curve. This is a famous curve, right? This may be a question on an assignment, but if you have the left-hand side, this is dealing with poor performance that can lead to good performance. The right-hand side, if we don't handle our stress levels, it can lead to illness. Now I want to talk about taking control, managing stress, exercising control rather than giving up. Individuals can decide to control or not control the stress response. It's up to us, right? So if we look back at the beginning of the class where I had you all list stressors that you started, you want to think about, are any of these eustressors, right? These are good stress, like the stress that you get from putting yourself, taking time to study for a test in order to do well, and then revving yourself up, or having your heart rate rise in order to give a speech. You want to add other examples of eustress from your life, right? Make a list of techniques that you, your friends, and your family currently use to manage that stress. These are all important steps in reducing stress, and this is one of the reasons why many of you signed up for this class. I'm a big fan of writing things down. So typically I'll write a paragraph about the occurrence of a stress. And then I would look at the feedback loop in my life. How did that feedback loop function to intensify the effects of the stressor? Right? I like to demonstrate the importance of perception and the effects of stress. I would like for you all to describe an event or a situation from your life that would have been less stressful if you could have changed your perception about it. Right? So I have a lot of students that come to me because they're intimidated about taking a communication class. And then if I can get them to change their perception, because I'm taking this communication class because I might be a teacher one day, or I might go to law school. And the ways in which this instructor got me to reduce my anxiety is going to help me in the long run. Right? So can you think of an event or a situation that you perceived it differently, like this communication example that I'm giving you? And why do you think this happens? Identify several areas of your life in which you feel like a victim, and rewrite those descriptions to identify the control you actually exert in these situations. Make a list of positive consequences of stress in your life. Right? What techniques do you currently use to manage stress? Do you work out? Do you go to church? Do you meditate? Do you practice yoga? Do you go to the park? Do you go to the beach? Do you like to sunbathe? Are you involved in a reading circle? These are all ways in which you can manage stress. All right. So the last bullet point says employing stress management techniques in a stressful way. Employing stress management techniques in a stressful way is dysfunctional. You want to be positive about how we put these stress management techniques to use. So start right away. Determine a contract with yourself, including rewards and accomplishments. Plan punishments for not fulfilling the contract. Healthy punishments, right? But like maybe taking away your junk food day that you had set. That could be a healthy punishment. Or I'm gonna go for a walk if I do not fulfill this particular goal of mine. And set realistic goals, right? I have students all the time that come and say, I'm going to study 6 hours a day. Well, that's not realistic because you have your leisure time, you have your work schedule, whether you work part-time or full-time. We got to incorporate all of that into our time management schedule, right? So this whole class is centered around how we are reducing our stress and figuring out ways to combat the stressors in our life, right? So I really hope that you took something from this particular chapter, because we talked about a lot of good stuff. Now remember, there's eustress and then there's also distress, right? The eustress is the good stress that involves us paying attention to how our heart level is raised in order for us to perform, and it's usually performing in a task that's going to benefit us in the long run, whether it's interviewing for that job, right? Or whether it is, giving a speech in our communication course in order to get a good grade, because we need that for our associate's degree, and we also need that class to transfer to the California State University system. So I am Counselor and Professor Rob Alexander. Thank you for taking notes, and just be prepared to answer the questions that are involved with lecture number 5. Take care for now. Bye.